Good evening and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, the International Committee of the Red Cross and the Conflict in Gaza, hosted by us in partnership with the Anglo-Jewish Association. For those joining us for the first time, my name is Mia, and I'm the Executive Director of Renee Kassan, the Jewish Voice for Human Rights in the UK. We work to promote and protect universal human rights in the UK, drawing on Jewish teachings, Jewish heritage, and Jewish experience. Our mission is to catalyze the British Jewish community's engagement with fundamental rights and freedoms through advocacy, lobbying, and education. While our policy work is UK focused, since October 7th, 2023, we have recognized the importance of providing in-depth legal analysis of the complex international legal issues surrounding the conflict in Israel and Gaza. Like in previous sessions in this series, our aim is not to simplify or judge, but to understand the legal frameworks, humanitarian principles, and the operational realities that shape the work of organizations like the ICRC in this conflict. Tonight's session follows last week's landmark agreement between Israel and Hamas, a moment of relief and reflection amid a long and devastating conflict. The deal led to the release of the remaining living Israeli hostages, the return of several bodies, and the implementation of a ceasefire in Gaza. In fact, as we speak, the ICRC is facilitating the return of another Israeli, of the body of another Israeli hostage to Israel. The ICRC also enabled a significant increase in humanitarian aid, and with over 190,000 tons of food, medicine, and shelter supplies entering the enclave. Throughout the conflict, and we've all been exposed to various sources of media, the International Committee of the Red Cross has faced intense scrutiny for its action and inaction, particularly regarding Israeli hostages, Palestinian detainees, and its ability to uphold dignity and safety in such operations. The ICRC's, the International Committee of the Red Cross, has consistently defended its neutrality and limited mandate, noting that its actions are bound by the parameters set by the fighting parties. So to help us unpack these complex issues, I'm really delighted to welcome tonight's speaker, Noa Schreuer. Noa is a legal advisor at the ICRC's delegation in New York. Prior to this, she served as political and legal advisor on international humanitarian law and human rights at the ICRC delegation in Israel and the occupied territories, and held legal advisory roles within the Israeli Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Noa will speak for approximately 40-45 minutes, after which we will open the floor up for questions from you, from the audience. So please keep those in mind, and Noa will be very happy to respond. Finally, before I pass the mic on to Noa, you will have noticed this event is recorded, and a transcription is also available. Thank you, and Noa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mia. Thanks to you and to Renee Kassan for having me tonight. And thanks to all the participants for showing up tonight. Very, very happy to be here with you, even if virtually. My name is Noa Schreuer, as Mia introduced me. I'm an Israeli, born and raised. I am currently living in New York City as of last year. And as mentioned by Mia, I've been with the International Committee of the Red Cross with the ICRC for 4 years now in different roles. And what I will hope to share with you tonight is a little bit of perspective and some personal impressions and experience from my work for the ICRC over the past 2 years since the outbreak of the horrific war between Israel and Hamas. But before doing so, given that respecting the platform that we are in, and the fact that this is a part of a series of international law briefings and lectures, I would like to provide you, if I may, with some historical context and to clarify a little bit what is that legal framework that the ICRC operates within, before jumping into some more personal reflections. So the ICRC goes back to 1863. This is at the end of the 19th century when the ICC was established. It is formed by a group of Swiss men, among which was a person named Henri Dunant. We're talking about a Swiss businessman who had encountered on his travels around Europe, and more specifically in northern Italy, a battlefield in the city of Solferino, and he writes a memoir about that, about his reflections from that battlefield, essentially depicting what will become the movement, or the Red Cross movement, and the organization of the Red Cross. He talks about in this memoir of Solferino, Memory of Solferino, sorry, about the need to allow for a certain third party to be able to run across the fire lines and to provide humanitarian aid. At that moment, what he foresaw was something that had to do with the combatants on the field, so not as much with civilians, but I'll get to that in a minute. But essentially, the idea was born out of the need to provide medical assistance and other humanitarian assistance to those wounded in the battlefield, and of course to those dead. So this was the very the birth of this whole movement, and it then evolved. And when I say movement, I'm talking about a wider group of organizations that include my own, that includes the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is an organization that sits, our headquarters is in Geneva in Switzerland, and we operate in about in more than 100 conflict areas around the world in field delegations. But this movement is far bigger because it includes what we refer to as national societies, such as the British Red Cross, Magen David Adom, that you may be familiar with, American Red Cross. So each country has its own Red Cross, Magen David Adom, or Red Crescent for that matter. So this is the bigger movement that we are a member of. And so what is the mandate, or what gives the ICRC its powers, its authorities to act in those more than 100 conflict areas? ICRC has very specific roles that were designated to it under the Geneva Conventions. The Geneva Conventions are, in fact, what constitutes international humanitarian law, or some refer to it as the laws of war. And those roles there's a variety of them, but they include, for example, something that may come to mind. May come to mind as a visitation of persons held in detention or deprived of their liberty in relation to conflicts. So, for example, prisoners of war in some armed conflict where the Red Cross has the right, of course, this is subject to the party holding the detainee, allowing it to enter. But essentially, under international humanitarian law, the Red Cross is a neutral intermediary and a party that can go and visit those persons held in detention, and also establish their family links by providing, for example, Red Cross messages. These are all practices that the Red Cross has been engaged in throughout the globe for many years. So I think I'll stop there, and with this I'll zoom into where I was where I was sitting. There are no words, there are no suitable words that I can find to describe, and I don't think I need to share with any of you listening here the essence of that terrible day and the horrible war that unfolded since. I think from my perspective, what I would like to share, and that is not oftentimes shared with the wider public for different reasons, but I think this is, and I'm very thankful for Mia for giving me this opportunity to be to have this frank conversation with you. I would like to share with you what that looked like from the perspective of the ICRC sitting in Israel, but also globally. So, in fact, the first thing that happened before any other operational step was taken was to publicly condemn the act of taking of hostages. And when we talk about international humanitarian law that I mentioned earlier, I want to make very clear here, as we have in other occasions, but this is yet another opportunity to reiterate that the taking of hostages is a grave violation of international humanitarian law. It is considered a grave breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention, which means, in other words, in simpler words, it means that the taking of hostages is a war crime. And this is something that was stated from the onset of this conflict, and basically the message was that the mere act of taking hostages is illegal, and that all hostages should be immediately released without any conditions. Immediately and unconditionally was were the words that have followed throughout. Now, when it comes to handling this situation, which was unprecedented in many means, especially from the Israeli perspective, this was not like anything that the state of Israel has encountered, and very few states around the world as well. But one of the first steps was to reinforce ICRC's dialogue with Hamas. So I will say, maybe just to kind of give you the picture of how our delegation in Israel and the occupied territories works, is that we have an office based in Gaza, in the Gaza Strip. The office was throughout the years, this is far before October 7th, but it was based in Gaza City, and since the beginning of the war, it had moved a couple of times and had to be our colleagues had to be evacuated to Rafah and to Khan Yunis. But our presence has remained in Gaza consistently from before the war. In fact, the ICRC has been present in Israel and in the occupied territories since 1967 uninterruptedly. So right after the 6 Days War. Now we have the office in Gaza, and the relationship with Hamas was in place. So we had contacts within Hamas in the Gaza Strip. However, you can imagine that from the minute the attack took place and the war unfolded, that communication was no longer feasible to maintain, because the persons involved were not available for any of those conversations, and so the majority of the interaction that ICRC had with Hamas throughout these 2 years has taken place from outside of Gaza, in different countries where the leadership of Hamas is based, and that has happened along the way in many different levels in the organization. From the president of the organization, Mirjana Spoljaric, that had gone to Doha, Qatar, on many different occasions to to push for these messages and to call for the unconditional and immediate release of all hostages, and until that happens, to ensure the access of ICRC to those people being held in Gaza in order to provide them with medical aid and to reestablish their family links. So providing a proof of life. There are many different ways of doing that, but we have been trying to come up with creative ideas and solutions that would enable, that would allow for this to happen. I will say, I'm going to jump ahead in a couple of minutes to where we are today, because over the past 2 weeks, you know as well as I do that the situation has changed dramatically on that end. But I will say at the outset that these efforts were not successful. Our efforts to gain access, we were not able to conduct any of those visits. So I say this, but I mean, the fact that we never managed to make it doesn't mean that that these efforts were not ongoing throughout the entire time. And I will say, I will divert just for a minute from the situation of the hostages, because there's a lot to say. There's a lot to, a lot that could be said about that. But I want to remind of something that I feel is often left out of the picture. And the fact is that the October 7th attack had not only created an unprecedented situation in terms of hostage taking, but also the humanitarian impact of that attack on the Israeli society, in terms of people dead and wounded, created a massive influx that Israeli authorities, and I think naturally, people had to. It took a while. That's what I'm trying to say, for institutions and for everyone involved to wrap their head around what had happened and how grave the situation was. And of course, I didn't mention even the displaced. So I'm saying all of this because I do want to mention another fact that is not often discussed, but many of the efforts of the ICRC office in Tel Aviv, as part of the delegation, are geared towards providing humanitarian assistance to that society that was impacted by supporting financially or professionally daily social economic centers for youth in Ofakim, for example. That's one project that we're now running in the Gaza envelope. Ofakim was one of the townships that was most vastly impacted by the attack. Supporting polyclinics up north around the northern border, because you will remember that the front between Israel and Hezbollah had gained a very, very high toll as well. So there are efforts that are happening, humanitarian efforts that are invested towards that society, and I just want to put it there because I think it's not common knowledge, and I think this is another element of the war that should also be borne in mind, because these people are still, the effects of the war are still there. They are carrying, the impact of that, and ICRC is involved to some extent in trying to alleviate that suffrage. So I will fast forward a little bit to what ICRC was able to do, other than advocating and pushing in a bilateral manner with Hamas and with other parties. By the way, Hamas is one of the parties to the conflict, alongside Israel. But this as you've seen in the recent agreement and in previous agreements, this entire situation involves so many third parties, which ICRC was also negotiating and pushing with whoever had any possibility to influence the situation and to bring the parties to the table to allow for an agreement to happen that would then provide ICRC with the space to operate. Someone that we engaged with. So this was all happening on one level, and then at some point at the end of October, we started seeing now this is all in hindsight. This is something that we can tell as time passed, but back in the days at the end of October 2023, when 4 women were released out of 4 hostages were released out of captivity. This had happened not within the framework of a ceasefire agreement, but rather as I call it a test drive. It sounds funny, but the fact is that this was in a way to test the ground and to see that this mechanism where ICRC delegates on the ground are able to take the hostages from the hands of Hamas and to pass them on, to drive them out of Gaza into the hands of the IDF. This was actually tested for the first time through this mechanism. And I go back to that moment because for me, as a person, as a human being, but also as an ICRC colleague and as an Israeli, I think this was a key moment because I know, I know the considerations that went into deciding to step up and to take part in an operation that was highly complex. And as the war progressed, those operations looked, more and more uncontrolled, and were taking place in a heavily dangerous area. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I go back to that moment because it took some courage. It actually took a lot of courage to say we want to be there, we want to show up, and we want to be the party or the organization that parties to conflict can trust, so that we can be relied on for those other agreements to come. And that's exactly what happened. And there were no guarantees in place. Now, I share this with you very candidly because the ICRC I mentioned was established by a group of Swiss people. It's a Swiss organization by nature. Its ability sometimes to divert from procedures, from standard operating procedures, is not very high. But at that moment, even though there were not guarantees given neither by the IDF nor by Hamas, for the security of our people driving around in a bombed Gaza Strip, I think it was a very strategic choice and a very brave one, and that then allowed for the parties more conveniently to come back to that model, and having ICRC called upon in the agreements that then happened. And so let me talk a little bit about what it looks like on the ground for our colleagues. And indeed, Mia was reporting live as our colleagues are now driving around in the Gaza Strip in order to hand over the human remains of a deceased hostage and to bring them back to respectful burial in Israel, which is currently the focus of our efforts. But I mean, a lot has been said. You will have read a lot of media reports, and you will have seen those horrific and disturbing photos coming out of those moments where hostages were being handed to the ICRC against a spectacle that that the ICRC has absolutely, on any occasion possible, resented and rejected and try to object with Hamas, with the mediators, whoever was able to ensure that those release operations take place in a way that is respectful and dignified for the persons involved. Okay, in that case, it was the hostages, but those hostages are entitled to a set of rights under the Geneva Conventions, and one of them is to be protected from public curiosity. And therefore, among our requests and pleas to the parties when we were, called upon to play that role, was to ensure that these operations are not being filmed, that they are not degrading and humiliating to the people involved, and that they do not have to incur or to be under any more suffrage than they have already been through. And this was not always successful. One has to be very, this is no secret. And it goes back to ICRC's ability, which I didn't mention, but I think it's important to maybe raise it at this point. ICRC's ability to enforce the law or to enforce its role on the parties is extremely limited. And this is something that is oftentimes, very easy to forget, because what we are seeing is outraging. And I can assure you, not only from my personal perspective, but in the environment where I work in, these were not acceptable situations. These will never be acceptable situations that where a person who was taken hostage unlawfully is humiliated in that sense, or is being threatened, and so forth. But it comes back to what is it that what tools does the ICRC have to enforce its role? And that also applies to the visitation that I mentioned before. The fact that we were not successful in gaining that access. Now, I want to take a step back and say that while this is highly frustrating, this is very much, to a large extent, this is a part of our day-to-day work all around the globe. I have colleagues operating in different areas like Ukraine, DRC, Sudan, in all of these conflict areas. On a daily basis, we as the ICRC, we are confronted with situations where the only tool that we have in our toolbox to enforce the law is persuasion and negotiation and trying to advocate for a certain cause. But we are not an armed organization, and this is, this is the nature of things. So I say all this as a reminder, maybe to provide a certain context, but also to clarify that these sites were never something that ICRC was agreeable with, or this is really something that we have tried to avoid for many for a long time. Today, the current efforts when it comes to the human remains of the hostages are such that the ICRC is called upon by parties in the Gaza Strip, be it Hamas or other armed groups operating there, to provide forensic support in recovering those remains. We're not actively recovering the remains ourselves, but we are there to provide the tools and to oversee that those searches continue and are ongoing in accordance with the agreement between the parties. And of course, a whole different segment that I haven't even touched upon, but I'm happy to talk to that if there's interest at a later stage, is our operations within the Gaza Strip, and most prominently the field hospital that has opened, the Red Cross Field Hospital that we have launched in May 2024. Where throughout the past year and a half, because it opened in May 2024, we've seen a huge influx of gunshot wounded civilians being admitted to the hospital. And I would just maybe share a number that I learned just in preparing to our conversation today, and I thought was interesting, is that in the first week of the current ceasefire, the number of patients admitted to the field hospital had dropped from 70 to below 20, which is dramatic. And I thought this was a really interesting figure because it's a way to see, how these agreements translate and trickle down to the life of humans on the ground. So that is a big part of our operations in the Gaza Strip. Of course, there's also humanitarian aid that is entailed in that agreement. We are reading. I mean, we are all reading the same news. So some of you may have read that due to certain violations of the agreement, the crossings might be closed. I don't have the accurate details on that, but what I do know is that the ICRC endeavors to extend as much as possible the entry of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip because the needs are unbelievably dire for the civilian population there. So I think I will take a pause there, if that's okay, and perhaps we can try to collect some questions, and yes, and I'll conclude maybe with there's maybe one more thing that I would like to conclude with, but maybe if people have questions, it will be a good time to.
I'm going to jump in, give people time to think, and please do write any question you have. Noa, you described in much detail the ICRC's involvement with Israeli hostages in Gaza, but equally the ICRC has come to public attention with regards to Palestinian prisoners in Israel. And there was criticism of inaction and action. If you could explain a little bit about that as well, because that is part also of the perception and the image we have of the ICRC in the context of this conflict.
Yes, thanks, Mia, for raising that question. So I will say that up until October 7th, the visitation of Palestinian detainees held in Israeli territory was probably the largest chunk of operational activity that the ICRC was doing in Israel and the occupied territories. So I say this because traditionally, or throughout the years since 1967, without interruption, ICRC had conducted those visits on a weekly basis. Not only ICRC visits to places of detention in Israel, but also organizing and facilitating the visits of family members coming from the West Bank, from Gaza. At some point, this was no longer possible. So this was a large chunk of what we've done up until then, and on October 7th, all those visitation activities had ceased. ICRC is currently, and since October 7th, had not been able to visit Palestinian detainees held held by Israel. But the part that Mia you might be referring to is ICRC's role in also facilitating the release of Palestinian detainees as a part of that deal, because we all know that the deal is composed of hostages and detainees being released simultaneously in a way. And so ICRC plays a very active role in transferring those detainees from their respective places of detention. To date, it has facilitated the release of nearly 3,500 Palestinian detainees. And on top of that, 150 deceased Palestinians. And in terms of statistics, or not statistics, but numbers, when it comes to hostages since the outbreak of the war, ICRC had facilitated the release of 160 live hostages and 19 deceased hostages. So altogether 179. But Mia, this is definitely a very crucial part of what ICRC does, because one part of the agreement cannot take place without the other, and this is essentially where ICRC is relied upon by the parties, including by the Israeli authorities, to conduct that role and to facilitate that release. Yeah, I hope that helps.
Thank you, Noa.
I see there is a question. How does the use of preventing sufficient food and watering other essential items as part of warfare fit in with international rules of war? Thanks, Leslie, for the question. So, well, I mean, I will not answer this question in relation to what we are seeing on the ground in Gaza, because one thing maybe that I should have mentioned earlier is that how the ICRC operates is in a bilateral and confidential manner, and that means we engage directly with the parties to armed conflict. Parties being governments, parties being armed groups, whoever has control over a certain territory in an armed conflict, or over people for that matter, is considered a party to the conflict from our perspective, is a party with whom we will engage in order to ensure that access. But that means that in order to enable that dialogue, our method of doing that is to remain confidential in our communication. And so you will quite scarcely find situations where we talk directly to a certain practice or a certain violation committed by the parties. So I want to answer that question, but I will not answer it with regards to what is happening in the current war, because this is something that we are and will communicate with the parties directly. But in any case, the prevention of food and water is prohibited, especially, I mean, if it's an intentional one. This is, I mean, you have certain rules of siege under international humanitarian law, but essentially the bottom line is that civilians that are, caught in an armed conflict or caught in a situation of fire are entitled to protections. And yes, the most essential right is that to food and water. This is not something that any party to an armed conflict can deprive of persons, be it from civilians or from people people detained. So even the people detained or taken in captivity, they are entitled to a set of rights that, of course, include water and food, but other rights as well. The right to family. So, okay, the right to have a family link. Even if you're in captivity, you still maintain a very basic layer or red line of humane rights that need to be protected and need to be respected by the warring parties, by the parties to the armed conflict. So yeah, the question is how does it fit? It doesn't. If I have to be very blunt, it just doesn't. Yeah, sorry, there is another question. On how you try to protect individuals from public curiosity. Thanks, Ayn. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing it well. That's a very interesting question. So I was talking about the public curiosity in the context of the release operations. So, of course, as I mentioned, one of the things we did was before each and every round, or let's say, each and every one of those release operations, we very, very strongly insisted with Hamas and with the mediators that those public displays and spectacles cease and that they don't take place. So one way where we tried to prevent that was by persuasion. That had a limited success because it took a couple of those operations to happen before those spectacles completely ceased. So that's one way. But I can share very, very from very internal point of view that I remember in the first release operations there were some of our way of preparing to receive those hostages in our trucks, in our cars that you see you see in the media in Gaza. The thought was to cover up the windows in order to protect them exactly from public curiosity. Then at a certain point, this created a problem from a security point of view, both from all armed arm bearers, including IDF and Hamas, that were involved on the ground. There was an issue with the warring parties not being able to monitor what is happening in the car. So I'm sharing all of these pieces that are very, very operational and detailed. But I mean, these considerations are always taken into thought because for us, for the ICRC, the threshold or the standard would always be to think what the beneficiary or what the person, the victim of that armed conflict now needs from us, and how we can deliver that to them in the way that that can alleviate the pain that they're experiencing right now. So this is really, I mean, it was a part of the considerations, as do other considerations, by the way, for those release operations. So, for example, maintaining female colleagues on the ground throughout these 2 years was a conscious choice that was taken by our management, because first of all, this was important also for the release of female hostages, and for them to be able to interact with the female, the first moment when they come out of captivity, but even for a later stage, and for example, including medical personnel or mental health personnel in the team that will be able to provide emergency healthcare if needed upon the minute that person comes out of captivity. So there are a lot of considerations that go into that operation, as well as as well as looking around and trying to navigate that terrain, which is, I mentioned it before, but it's really, I mean, it also has changed so dramatically. I have a colleague who was there for the relief operations in February and had now returned from where she serves, where she's deployed in Kinshasa, I mean, she had been in Gaza a couple of months ago, but this was a different Gaza than what she had remembered, because really the terrain is absolutely destroyed. So to be able to drive along in the streets and also avoid unexploded ordinances, these are all things you have to take to be very, very careful about when you do this kind of work.
Thank you, Noa. Are there any other questions? Otherwise, I'll jump in again. Probably privilege of facilitator, but again, I'll give you time to think. Please do take advantage of the fact that we have Noa with us at least for another 10 minutes. But Noa, something maybe on more of a personal note. Yeah, in terms of both as an Israeli, but you work for the ICRC, you identify or represent the institution. What gives you hope right now in the, and what should we as a community, not just the Jewish community, but I guess civil society as a whole do in the wake of now the ceasefire deal, at least for now, and hopefully lasting end of suffering on both sides. So what do we do to ensure this is a lasting moment? Maybe bring your Swiss, the ICRC Swiss mentality to it, if you may.
Well, I'll start with what gives me hope. I think I find hope in the photos I'm seeing right now. Coming out of Israel. I see families who have managed to overcome the worst and to find their way to embrace each other, which is I don't know about you all, but there were days when this was really not a given. So this is something that I try to draw hope from. But of course, I'm always conscious that this is not, unfortunately, this is not enough. I wish we could kind of pose that these beautiful moments and stay with them, but we know that it's simply not enough to address the immense amount of pain that still exists for so many people, for Palestinians, for Jews, for Israelis, in that corner where we come from. There's a lot to be done, and I think, look, I can't answer as an ICRC personnel, but because I have to remain institutional. But I think what needs to happen is for parties to be able to talk, and I think the bottom line for me is that agreements save life. It's just a fact, and it's essential from ICRC's perspective to have the space to work, because when there is no ceasefire in place, it really, we really don't have the space to do what we're there to do. But also, for people to be able to have a sense of it's not normality. It's not going to be normal for a long while, unfortunately, for anyone. But people, states need to be able to come to the table and talk, because at the end of the day, these are people's lives. It's not a secret. I think we're all aware of it. It's just that I think agreements are invaluable, and I'm very grateful that this one, and I'm very hopeful that it will be, a platform to, or kind of like a small crack from which more hope can come in. Yeah, so that's for the hope. And I don't know if I missed the second question.
No, that.
Or what needs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that I think within the limitations of your hat.
But I do want to say one more thing about, I want to say something about neutrality. I talked a little bit about this, confidential and bilateral dialogue and how ICRC talks to all parties. I just want to say something that sometimes doesn't come across in translation, not literally in translation, but I think it's misunderstood. And that is that for the ICRC, neutrality is a tool to allow it to fulfill its duties, to fulfill its roles, to fulfill its mandate. But it's never an objective. This is, I mean, it's something that I think it also took me a while to grasp. But I think it's a key. It's a key notion to understand why the ICRC works the way it does. Because of course we are aware of the criticism. I mean, I as an ICRC person have lived this criticism for over 2 years now, and I think this point is really something that I wish more people would comprehend, that neutrality is only something that allows for the ICRC to operate in areas where others cannot enter those fire lines, enter those detention places. Not always. I mean, again, one has to be humble and frank and to recognize when this doesn't work, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work always. But it's still a way of action. But it doesn't mean that it's a benchmark, or it's something to strive to, or it's something we advocate for. And I mean, this is really something that I want to kind of convey, because I think sometimes neutrality is being conflated or confused as a value. It's not a value. It's a method of work. Also, ICRC people are human beings. They come across, they encounter human tragedies all the time on a daily basis. They're not neutral to that tragedy, and this is really something that I want to take the opportunity to kind of to convey to you.
Thank you, Noa, and I'm really happy that we were able to provide that space for that really important final observation. If there are no other questions, this is your final call. Raise your hand, virtual hand, real hand, or write in the chat. Otherwise, I'm sure you will join me with thanking Noa for really a brilliant session. Providing the parameters and the understanding we then need to go and reflect and make our own assessment or decision on things. And I would like to invite all of you, like I mentioned at the beginning, this session is part of a series. We've had 6 already. You can find those in our YouTube event. We have an exciting program for 2026, including topics of international jurisdiction, the act of genocide, which is the destruction or targeting of families, entire families, a review from last year's sessions on the role and the proceedings in the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. So really within this series, exciting sessions to come up. So do sign up to our newsletter, because that is where you will get notice about these sessions coming up. We also have a few exciting events coming up just in the next couple of weeks, from celebrating 75 years of the European Convention on Human Rights. And I'm sure many of you in the last few months here in the UK, I've heard a lot about the European Convention, celebrating 25 years of the UK's Human Rights Act and International Human Rights Day. So please, yeah, do sign up. We've shared a link to our events on the chat, and you're welcome to join. And yeah, be a supporter and a friend of Renee Kassan. Come to our events, give us a donation. Positive feedback or any feedback that you have is always welcome. So again, Noa, thank you very much for taking the time to share some of your work with us this evening. And good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening.
You know.
Thanks, Mia.